This year, Kirsten, it's been very deliberate. I have a communications and marketing background. I used to use it for very conventional healthcare, pharma, and then it almost, it really started saddening my soul because I was basically, whatever I was doing, I was helping pharma companies. And I truly believe that there is a place in healthcare for medicine and treatment when you need it. But there's a very big role for prevention and awareness that's not, especially in a very sort of capitalistic economy that we live in, there's no room for that because that's all free. Your prevention to a large extent is, it doesn't cost as much. So I started transitioning to public health. I think being an adult immigrant, I came to the States when I was 21. I turned 40 this year. And this year, I know this sounds really cliched, but I feel like I'm at the cusp of the rest of the other half of my life. And I feel like if I don't make a change now, I'm going to get dragged into this, oh, what if I had done this and I didn't do it? So I don't know if this is going to be successful, but the true realm of what I'm trying to do this year is, one, take my connections in the community for public health, and also take my photography skills and try and bring those two together. And the real goal at a very high level is to almost defy, well, not almost, to defy stereotypes that I think mainstream media, which is very dominated by white reporters and white photographers who look at people of color in a certain way. And it's almost, I feel like there's this hangover of colonization where the impression, even before you understand what that person is doing, if you're Black, then you must be of a certain income class. Or if you're Latino, you must be, like working a certain type of job. And I feel it's those visual stereotypes that get in the way of truly getting to know someone or respect someone and be kind. Because I actually don't think that people who are racist or ignorant, I think a lot of those people don't even realize that they're being that way. There is a whole group of people who are intentionally hurtful, who intentionally believe in white supremacy and all of that. But I think there's also a very big group of people who really want resources for themselves, and they feel threatened by, outsiders or people who don't look like them. So I think the real goal is to start to defy stereotypes. And it's very focused on minorities, people of color, the LGBT community, women, especially women entrepreneurs, as they break out and start to become like their own boss. So I feel I'm at a very, very early starting point. I took years of photography. I'm a self-trained photographer. I think any professional, renowned photographer will look at my images and point out 5 different flaws, like technical flaws. But like you said, I'm at the point where I don't care anymore. I'm not trying to create this technically perfect photograph. To me, if it visually tells the story that I want to tell, and it represents the story of that person, that's what I'm trying to achieve. This is not solely about the photography. And so I'm at a point right now where I am seeking out paid work. I'm also developing my own, developing a Black men's project to show community builders. And that's a very deliberate effort to showcase Black men who are not thugs and they're not running around shooting people. And when they're getting shot on the street, it's for no good reason. And so that's really where I am right now. I'm in the process of setting up my website. This weekend is Pride. And so this is a big, big weekend. I live on 17th Street in DC, which is a complete neighborhood. There's flags everywhere you go. And so this weekend I'm photographing for an organization called HIPS, which works very specifically with the LGBT community, with trans women, with sex workers. And I feel it's important to show those people as joyful and real people. They're not living in the shadows of society. They're not miserable. I mean, they're miserable based on how people treat them, but in and of themselves, they're not miserable. And I feel like we visually created this social class system where if you look a certain way, you get treated a certain way. If you're gay or you're dark skinned or you're not well dressed or you speak a certain way. I've had several people say to me, "Oh, you have an accent." I'm like, "Well, I didn't grow up here, so of course I have an Indian accent." So it's interesting. I feel like there's a lot to be done in terms of defying visual stereotypes. And I feel like if we start to look at people differently, we will inevitably start to treat them differently.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I agree with all of that. And I love what you said about not, you're not a professional photographer, like your work isn't perfect, and it doesn't matter because that's not the point. The point is to show
the word out,
share the lives of these people. And yeah.
And I will say that actually inhibited me for a long time because I was like, my photography isn't good enough. A lot of people are going to criticize my photography. And then I realized that it's not about the photography in and of itself. That's just a medium. So if people can look at the whole picture and look at the story and the photo as a complement, then that's what I'm really getting at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is the biggest lesson to learn when you are starting something or trying to do something or thinking about it, because we all think we need to be perfect and we all think we have to learn everything. And
it gets in the way.
Oh, it totally gets in the way and nobody cares. People like you and they like what you're doing and they like, what you're trying to do, they'll get behind you. It's
no, and I just feel like it's been such a breakthrough in my head that, you know what, I'm just going to do it. And what's the worst that'll happen? I will not get any photography work. I won't create any projects. So I'll create them and people won't like them. At least on my deathbed, I'll have checked it off my list. Like, I tried it. It didn't work, but I tried it. So, whatever.
Yeah, I love that. I might steal that quote, actually. I feel like it's funny, right? Because it's like at that age of like 40.
Yeah.
I start thinking about it. I'm 47, and I always said, like, in my early 40s, I started to say, by the time when I'm 50, I'm quitting my job and I'm going to just do my own thing. I was going to be a consultant. I was in fundraising for years. So I was going to be a consultant. And then I was just like, as like 42, 43, 44, I'm like, what am I waiting for? Like, why am I waiting till this, like,
gotta do it.
Like, just get out and do it. Yeah.
And I also feel, politically, I feel the time is right. I think the one good thing, if anything, has come out of Trump's administration is that I think every minority or everyone who feels marginalized in some way has started to look beyond themselves, and it's becoming an us versus them, with the them being a much, much smaller number. I look at the Resist March coming together in LA this weekend, the Women's March. I just feel like people are really realizing that they have to speak up, and they're resonating with people who speak up. And like you said, I feel like there are ordinary people who have jobs and families and dinner to cook and children to take to school, and, like in my case, like dogs to walk. But these are people who are understanding that if they continue doing just their daily checklists, that things are just going to, walk past us. I mean, look at the Marriage Equality Act, right? Like, yes, social media, but if it hadn't been for thousands and thousands of supporters speaking up and getting beyond their every day, I mean, where would we be today? Like, there would be no Marriage Equality Act. So, I think that's a really good example of something that we think affects only the LGBT community, but actually affects all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's about equal rights, and
absolutely. Yeah. And equal rights for you means eventually equal rights for me in some shape or form. So,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So can I talk a little bit about, so you talked a little bit about the problem you see, and that you're trying to, in somewhat to address, not in some ways, but to address with your work. But Specifically, you talk about documenting the lives of Black men. What, you know, why specifically that, or why were you called to that issue, or to that group of people?
So I think it's multiple reasons. One, being in DC for 17 years now, my community here is, I would say, mostly Black, I think, and I feel sort of a commitment and a loyalty to a community that has been family to me. DC is a very Black city. Most of my friends are Black. And then I see what is happening with Black men on the street, you know, whether they're driving to work or they're getting out of their car to drop their children to school, or, you know, just everyday things. That could be my husband on the street, and my husband's Indian. And I was just talking to my husband, telling him that a coworker of mine, a friend of mine, is Black, and her front passenger window was not rolling down. It was stuck. And she said, I have to leave work early today and get it fixed. And I was like, what's the hurry? You can go on, like, what's the rush? You can go on the weekend. And she said, no, if my husband's driving the car and the cops happen to pull him over and he reaches over to roll the window down, they may think he has a gun and he may shoot them, or they may shoot him. And I thought, I would never think that, because I'm not Black and my husband isn't Black. But if my husband was Black, imagine the chronic stress of something as simple as your car window being broken. And that said to me that, you know, we do not, with all of the brouhaha about living in a post-racial society with, you know, 8 years of Obama, there's still a lot to do. And so I'm focusing on Black men, one, because I feel I'm aligned with them, but I am not a Black man, obviously. And so I have a little bit of objectivity. Two, I feel I live in a Black city and I'm surrounded by amazing men who are just living their lives the best that they can. And they're doing really great at it, but the media never focuses on those stories. The media always picks up the men that are getting shot, the men that are, you know, breaking into neighborhoods, or men that are abandoning their families, men that are lazy and sitting on street corners. And so going back to the stereotype, the Black Men's Project is very specifically trying to defy stereotypes that I think white mainstream media has about Black men. And so I have just gotten started. I literally wrote it up and I have started reaching out to people. And just given that I don't have funding for this project right now, I'm limiting myself to DC, Maryland, Virginia, and then New York and Philly, just because I can drive to those places. But over time, I would love to, you know, apply for a photo grant and be able to fly to places like the South, where, you know, there is so much going on. So, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And so, what was the process to get you started? So you just talked about, you reached out, you wrote something up and then you reached out to organizations. So if for example, somebody else is listening to this and watching this and thinking, hey, I want to do that. So how did you get started?
So I was actually photographing the DC Funk Parade last year in 2016, and I saw this band of young Black men who were all scholarship kids, and they were learning music. And they were so joyful and happy, and here they were, like, creating music, being a part of the community. And it just really struck me that we never see those images in mainstream media. We always see these miserable, derogatory images of Black men. And so I thought about it for a lot longer than I should have. And then I actually applied for a photo a day photo grant, and obviously didn't get it. But then when I looked at the pictures of the people who had won, I was like, hey, like, they're not amazing pictures. They're not technically amazing pictures. And so that also helped me overcome my fear of having that perfect photograph. And so I then started writing it up. I went to the Washington Women's Photojournalist Photo Review and actually ended up connecting with Dudley Brooks, who's the deputy photo editor for the Washington Post. And he was so encouraging. And I was almost kind of nervous to meet him, because I thought he's going to shoot it down. He's going to tell me it's a stupid idea because, you know, you're not a Black man. Like, why are you doing this? But he loved the idea and he was really encouraging. And I was like, I just needed someone to push me over the edge. And so I'm now at the early phases of reaching out to people. And so for someone who's listening to this, I would say if you are a Black man who is doing your best, you know, you're taking care of your family, you're holding down a job, you've gone through college, you're doing something for the community, any of those things, I would love to. And if you're in like driving vicinity for me, I would love to photograph you. Or if you know, an amazing Black man who is really a role model for children, is a role model for other young Black men, I think I would love to photograph people like that. People who are everyday people. You don't have to be a celebrity. In fact, you should not be a celebrity. Just everyday people who are doing their thing, and just being the best versions of themselves is really people who I'm looking for. So.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll make sure I highlight that when I write your story up so that we can get the word out and help you find people. Cause I'm sure there are a lot of people, tons of people.
There are, I'm sure there are. Yeah.
In that.
Yeah. And actually this is a learning for me, Kirsten, is that now I've identified people, but I had not factored in how busy people are, especially people with kids. And I'm trying to work into their schedules, and it's like a million emails and texts before we actually find a time. So, so, I mean, these are one of the real life practical issues of photographing people, is that you have to work in with their schedules. So yeah, trying.
Yeah, definitely try to use an online schedule. I think that helps because people can just go on and be like, okay, this
pick a time. Yeah. Yep. That's a great idea. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I find it just so much easier because it's it lets them to see all your availability instead of going back and forth on email and stuff like that.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea. Yeah,
you just have to remember to update your schedule, which I tend to forget, and then I'm like, oh shoot, I'm double booked.
Yeah. No, that's a great idea. That's a good tool.
So what do you I know you're just getting started, but what do you hope will be the outcome of this? Do you kind of have a longer term vision and then maybe some goals along the way, or have you not thought that far ahead?
Some of it I have. I feel like right now, I think for me, logistically, I have to get a website up and running, and I'm working on that. I've gotten, again, I think when you put something out into the universe and you really wish it, like it comes back to you. Mm-hmm. And so I've had designers, and I've literally run into people at restaurants who I didn't know, and they've introduced me to someone sitting next to them who's a designer. And so we're really talking through the idea of a website, because at the end of the day, this is visual art, and it has to be somewhere appealing, not just a tiny square on Instagram. And so one for me personally is to get a nice website going. As someone who works on branding, I realize the importance of doing something nice and not just something tacky just to get myself going. And so I'm working on a website this year. I am really concentrating on over the next 2 to 4 months, getting at least 2 to 3 people to shoot and trying to get their stories up as content on the website. I'm also really looking at people who are doing events. And so I can be sort of a community event photographer. And again, this is about showing how much is going on in the community, which you will not see in the New York Times or in the Washington Post, mm-hmm. because they're covering these very high level issues, but the community has so much buzz around it, and that's going completely unnoticed. I mean, it's going completely, unnoticed. And so I'm hoping that over time, the website is going to become sort of a visual representation of positive things that are happening in, minority communities. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you said you were photographing at Pride this weekend and with Trans Group, and so is that tied into this project or?
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's also tied into, I do a lot of HIV communications, so it's tied into that, but I am going to be using it for, so I'm also trying to be a little bit strategic about like photography projects that I take, because I've been asked before to photograph projects, and for example, the American Institute for Accountants reached out to me and said, this is a year ago, and because they needed like an event photographer. And I thought about it, and I was like, you know what? maybe a year ago, I would have taken it just because it's a paid assignment. But I realize now that time is money, and it wasn't that well paid, honestly, that I would have sacrificed like an entire day to shoot. But more importantly, it was not, now that I have a sort of structured vision of what I want to do, their work was not fitting into what I was trying to do. It was, very successful, very affluent white men. And they were not even considering a charity donation from their fundraiser. And I was like, no, that doesn't really work for me. So, yeah.
Yeah, not your fit. I can
not my fit.
And I think it's true that when you're starting something new, you want everybody to love you, and you want just to get the attention. And so you're just like, oh, I'll take anything. And then you do quickly realize that even though like it might be a difference between like getting paid for something and not getting paid for something, the not getting paid for something a lot of times is more interesting.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And in fact, like I was on the DC Funk Parade shooting team in April this year, and it was all voluntary, but it gave me really good practice, and it gave me just more experience with shooting the kind of work that I want to shoot. And so I feel like it will all line up at the end. I'm not trying to be. I always say this, and I think this is what's going to save me, is I'm not hoping just to pay my mortgage through photography. And I think when you don't pay your mortgage through something, you're a little bit more selective about what you do. And so I like my photography to be the passion project that I have. And I really think that I'm someone who's very disciplined, and I think that's going to save me. I don't think something's going to happen overnight, but I think I'm going to keep at it. And I think the more I reach out to people, the more I connect with people, resources are just coming at me. I almost can't keep up with the people that are coming at me with ideas. Like tomorrow I'm talking to a friend of a friend, and she is a designer, and she's sharing her website ideas with me, which I think will really prod me to start thinking about the website, because I'm like, oh, I'll do it next weekend, and I'll do it next weekend. But I feel like, I need to get on it. And I have enough photographs for the website. So now it's just a matter of getting this website done. And I also think one of the things that I've realized is I know what I can and can't do, and you have to be willing to pay for what you cannot do, because that applies to me too. It's not just about going into an event and using your phone camera to run around and take some mediocre pictures. If you truly value the event that you're having, you will hire a photographer and hopefully hire me. So the same thing applies to developing a website, right? Like I am not a techie, so I should hire someone to pay for that quality work. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that's true. Although I do think website development has gotten a lot easier, especially if you're just starting and you want to get something that looks good up, but it's not too technically complicated. There's not too many moving parts. But I'm definitely a big proponent of hiring people to do the work that you're not good at, because it takes so long when you don't know what you're doing. And
then it may not get done. The more things intimidate you, the less likely you are to do them, and it just goes slower and slower. So so I feel like that's going to be my financial investment, is going to be my website, and hoping that over the year I'll find enough paid work that'll make it worthwhile. So
I'm sure you will.
Yeah, thank you.
So what are you learning about yourself in this process?
I'm learning that I tend to take on too much. And so I need to rein it in a little bit. And given the fact that I'm doing my public health communications consulting work and trying to do the photography work, I want to try and balance it out. I'm also learning that people have amazing stories to tell, but they've just never been asked to tell those stories. Kind of like you're asking me. I've never been asked before. And so I feel the more you give people at the grassroots level the opportunity to tell these amazing stories, the more it'll bubble up to the surface. And I think the photography is that's exactly what I'm trying to do with the photography, is give average people or people who've never been asked before just a very simple platform.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Most people, nobody ever asks them to tell their story, and most people don't listen either, which is a huge part of storytelling. And so, I mean, in a sense, you're listening with your camera, right? And it's,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I'm trying to make you listen with your camera. And I think that's the other thing that I realized, and for someone who works in communications, people don't have the bandwidth anymore. They don't have the attention span to read lots and lots of text and long form stories unless it's a research piece. And so partly with my photography, I'm hoping to cut to the chase and just create very specific images that tell you exactly what you need to know, but also tell the story from the person's perspective, not from my perspective. And so that's, especially when I'm shooting people who are not, you know, I mean, if I'm shooting a Black man, I want to be able to make sure that it's his voice that's coming across, not my perception of what his life is, because that in an ironic way would be, again, like suppressing his voice. So yeah.
And do you ask the people that you photograph to approve or something, the photographs when you're done?
I will. I haven't started shooting yet. I've lined up 3 people and I'm waiting on their schedules to open up so I can go in and shoot. But absolutely, because I feel like, one, it's a customer testimonial thing. Like if I shoot you and you like your photographs, then you're likely to bring more people into the fold. But also, you know, as much as I love some of the pictures I've taken, I think it's important. Some people don't like being photographed. Some people want this very model look, and that's not what I'm trying to go for. So I think as much as I'm going to want to get approval before I publish their photos, I'm also trying to set the expectation that this is not about making you look like a movie star. This is about photographing you in your real environment. And so try and keep it as authentic as possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's also, that's a hard one. I can see. I would be that person who would be very critical of the photographs.
Yeah.
What I had another question for you. I lost it. But one of the questions that was on my list is where are you finding joy in this? And then where are you finding frustration in your project?
So I'm finding a lot of joy in not being tied to that perfect photograph. I think that was stressing me out so much more than I realized. And also I find joy in the fact that I don't really care what other people think. As in, if I take a photograph and 5 professional photographers critique the hell out of the photograph, if there's areas for me to improve, then that's constructive criticism. But if people are just being snarky and mean for the sake of it, that doesn't really tend to faze me, because I feel like people who truly want you to succeed will be positive and will give you good feedback. So I find a lot of joy in just doing what I'm doing, and, you know, I'll be my own judge of whether I succeed or fail. What I find frustration in is, one, that, like I said, people's schedules are so busy that it's hard to be able to get to it immediately. So I have all this fire, and then someone's like, I'm not available till the 3rd week of July. And I was like, oh my God, okay, I have to just sit and wait. But I think the learning there is to not put all my eggs in one basket, is to start to approach multiple people at the same time and then just like straddle them. So it's, you know, I feel like it would be a lot more frustrating if I was doing this on a schedule. I think it's joyful because I'm my own boss in this. I can do it whenever I want. I can do it however I want. And I think going back to the conversation with the deputy photo editor, Dudley Brooks, I think he was really good at taking it down a notch for me. And I was like, what should I do? And he's like, do whatever you want. Like, every story can be different. Like, you have ideas from one story to another, like as I'm sure you do when you talk to different people. And he's like, don't get so stuck in, you know, don't get so stuck in a pattern. Let it just go. With every story, do what comes naturally. It doesn't have to, you know, all look and feel the same. It shouldn't all look and feel the same. So I think having that conversation with someone who's so seasoned and someone who is so encouraging, I think was really helpful to me.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, you know, follow your joy, follow what you're attracted.
Like, why are you making this so complicated?
Yeah. Well, I think
Yeah.
you're making it so complicated because you've been taught to do that. And it's that thing of
Right.
like, it's got to be like the most amazing, perfect thing ever, or nobody's going to want to
Right.
look at this. Yeah.
Right.
And
Right. I mean, that's exactly it. And I feel like if no one else loves it, but if I've, say, taken a picture of you and shot you and you like it, mission accomplished. So, yeah.
definitely. Definitely. And that's the best that you can hope for. And, you know, all the
There
rest
you
is
go.
icing on the cake. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So, two more questions. One
Mhm.
is, do you have any advice for people who are maybe 6 months to a year behind where you are now in thinking about doing something? And then also, what can I do for you? How can I help you?
So the first question, Kristen, I think is really great. I'm thinking of the advice I wish someone had given me is, one, be very serious about what you're trying to do. Like, just because you went to a dance class yesterday and you had a really good time, that may or may not warrant making a passion project out of. So be committed and make sure that it's sustainable for you. Like, I know photography is sustainable for me, because I have done it now for years for myself. I have I may not be at the top of my game, or I may not be like one of the best photographers out there, but I know enough to get it done. And I would say, and this is more of a business piece of advice, but like, pick your unique positioning factor. Like, don't just start doing something that 12 million people are doing, because you'd have to fight that much harder to be recognized and be visible. So like, my unique positioning factor is people of color, minority communities. So I'm not doing just any type of, like, I'm not doing bridal showers and, that kind of stuff. And so that's the one thing of it. Like, give your idea some structure and some thought. And I think really see if you're adding value. Like, if you're going to develop something that many, many other people have done, then are you really adding value with what you're doing?
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of like how you can help me, I think like getting the word out about, to communities of color, to, if like Black folk in DC who you think would be a good fit for the photography project, basically try and find fodder for me to photograph. But I think just having this conversation has been amazing.
Great. Yeah, no, it has. And I'm definitely going to look you up next time. So thank you so much. This has been wonderful, and I'll follow your work. And I'll probably finish the story in the next couple of weeks, and post it and tag you and all that. So,
oh, that's amazing. Yes. Yes. And send me your social media handle so I can start following you.
Okay, I will. Sounds good.
All right.
All
That's
right.
perfect. Thank you so much, Kristen. I really appreciate this.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.